Don't let me die out here, please. The journey of a brave Apache woman. The gunshot echoed across the desert canyon as Nina dove behind a boulder, blood already soaking through her buckskin shirt. 3 men on horseback circled the rocks where she hid, their rifles glinting in the harsh afternoon sun. She pressed her hand against the wound in her shoulder, feeling the hot blood pulse between her fingers. Her horse lay dead 20 yards away, shot out from under her during the ambush. The men wore badges, but Nina knew they were no lawmen. They were bounty hunters, and she was worth $500 to them, dead or alive. She had been riding toward the trading post in Silver Creek when they appeared from behind the red rocks. No warning, no chance to explain. Just bullets and shouting. Nina squeezed her eyes shut for a moment, trying to think through the pain. Her rifle was still strapped to her dead horse. All she had was the knife in her boot and a small pistol with 3 bullets left. Against 3 armed men, her chances were thin as paper. "Come on out, Apache girl," one of them called. "We don't want to make this harder than it needs to be." Nina knew that voice. It belonged to Carl Dixon, a man who had killed more Apache people than he could probably count. He collected scalps and sold them to the army for $20 each. She had seen him in town once, bragging about his kills while drinking whiskey. The memory made her jaw clench. She peered around the boulder. The sun was dropping toward the horizon, maybe 2 hours of daylight left. If she could hold them off until dark, she might have a chance. The desert would be her advantage then. She knew how to move in darkness, how to read the land by starlight. These men would stumble around like blind cattle. A bullet struck the rock near her head, spraying chips of stone across her face. She jerked back, tasting dust and blood in her mouth. Her shoulder screamed with pain, but she forced herself to stay focused. Panic would kill her faster than any bullet. "Your people burned down a ranch 3 days ago," Dixon shouted. "Killed a family. You're going to pay for that." Nina's blood went cold. She had been nowhere near any ranch. She had been hunting deer in the mountains, alone, trying to bring food back to her grandmother who was too old to hunt anymore. But these men did not care about truth. To them, one Apache was the same as any other. She checked her pistol again. 3 bullets. 3 men. It would have to be perfect, and even then, she would need luck. Her vision blurred for a moment, and she realized she was losing too much blood. The wound needed to be bound, needed pressure, but there was no time. She tore a strip from her shirt and stuffed it against the hole in her shoulder, biting back a cry of pain. The horses were getting closer. She could hear their hooves scraping against rock, the creak of leather saddles. They were moving in, tightening the circle. Soon they would be close enough to rush her position all at once. Nina looked at the sky, at the endless blue stretching above the canyon walls. She thought of her grandmother waiting for her, wondered if the old woman would ever know what happened out here. Then she pushed the thought away. She was not dead yet. Not yet. She took a deep breath, steadied her shaking hand, and prepared to fight. The first man came around the left side of the boulder on foot, his rifle raised. Nina fired without hesitation, her bullet catching him in the chest. He went down hard, surprise frozen on his face. Before the other 2 could react, she was moving, scrambling over rocks toward a deeper section of the canyon. Bullets chased her, ricocheting off stone, but she kept running. Her legs felt weak, her vision swimming, but she forced herself forward. Behind her, she heard Dixon cursing, heard the sound of the remaining men dismounting. They would follow on foot now, more careful, more dangerous. She slid down a rocky slope, landed badly, and felt something twist in her ankle. The pain shot up her leg, mixing with the fire in her shoulder. She found cover behind a fallen tree wedged between 2 rocks. Her breath came in ragged gasps. 2 bullets left. 2 men still hunting her. The sun was lower now, shadows growing long across the canyon floor. She just needed to survive a little longer. "You killed my brother," a voice called out, younger than Dixon's, cracking with emotion. "You killed him, and now I'm going to make you hurt before you die." Nina recognized that voice, too. It belonged to Pete Dixon, Carl's younger brother. She had heard he was soft, that he followed Carl around like a puppy, trying to prove himself. Now he had something to prove, and that made him more dangerous than his experienced brother. She heard them splitting up, one going high along the canyon rim, one staying low. They were smart enough not to make the same mistake twice. Nina looked at her pistol, then at the darkening sky. The stars would be out soon. She had grown up reading those stars, learning their names and patterns from her father before the soldiers took him away. A rock clattered somewhere to her right. Nina spun, pistol raised, but saw nothing. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The wound in her shoulder had stopped bleeding as much, but she felt cold despite the desert heat. That was a bad sign. She knew what blood loss did to a person. "Don't let me die out here," she whispered to the wind, to the spirits of the land, to anyone who might be listening. "Please." Not like this. Another sound, this time from above. She looked up and saw Pete Dixon silhouetted against the dimming sky, his rifle pointed down at her. Their eyes met across the distance. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then his rifle barked, and Nina threw herself sideways, her pistol answering with its own thunder. Pete's rifle clattered on the rocks as he fell, tumbling down the canyon wall in a cloud of dust and loose stone. He landed 15 feet from Nina, not moving. She pulled herself up, every muscle screaming, and checked him. Dead. Her bullet had found its mark. One left. Just Carl Dixon now, and full darkness was only minutes away. Nina gathered Pete's rifle and ammunition, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped them twice. She found water in his canteen and drank deeply, the liquid cutting through the dust in her throat. Then she bound her shoulder properly with strips torn from Pete's shirt, pulling the fabric tight until the pain made her gasp. Carl would be more careful now. He had seen both his companions fall. He would wait, be patient, try to outlast her. But Nina had something he did not have. She had the absolute certainty that if she failed here, her grandmother would die alone, waiting for food that would never come. She moved quietly through the growing shadows, the rifle held ready. Her ankle throbbed with each step, but she ignored it. Pain was just information. It could not stop her unless she let it. The canyon opened into a wider area where ancient cottonwood trees grew near a thin stream of water. Nina saw Carl's horse tied to one of the trees, but no sign of Carl himself. She studied the area carefully, looking for any movement, any sign of an ambush. The horse nickered softly, ears forward, looking at something behind her. Nina spun, bringing the rifle up, but Carl was already there, his gun pointed at her face. They stood 5 feet apart, weapons aimed, both breathing hard. "You're fast," Carl said. "I'll give you that. Faster than your people usually are." "I people," Nina said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her, "are faster than you will ever know. You just never lived long enough after meeting them to learn that." Carl's eyes narrowed. Big talk for someone who's about to die. "One of us is," Nina agreed. "But I have killed 2 men today. You have killed none." Something flickered across Carl's face, maybe doubt, maybe respect. His finger tightened on the trigger, and Nina knew this was the moment. She could see it in his eyes, the decision being made. She thought of her grandmother one last time, hoped the old woman would forgive her for failing. Then a voice cut through the tension like a knife through leather. "Drop it, Dixon. Right now." Both Nina and Carl froze. From the trees emerged a man on horseback, a star pinned to his vest that caught the last rays of sunlight. He was maybe 50 years old, with gray streaking his dark hair and a face weathered by years in the desert. His rifle was pointed directly at Carl Dixon. "Marshal Cooper," Carl said, not lowering his weapon. "This is bounty work." "That bounty was canceled 2 days ago," the marshal said, his voice calm but firm. "The real raiders were caught up near Apache Pass. This girl had nothing to do with it. Now lower your weapon, or I will shoot you where you stand." Nina watched Carl's face work through the information, saw him calculating odds, considering his options. She kept her own rifle steady, ready for whatever he decided. "You're lying," Carl said finally. "Trying to save your Apache friend here." "I don't lie," Marshal Cooper said. "I don't have Apache friends or white friends. I just have the law, and right now the law says you're about to commit murder if you pull that trigger. Your choice, Dixon. Be smart for once in your life." The moment stretched out, tension thick enough to cut. Nina's arms were shaking from holding the rifle steady, her wounded shoulder burning like fire. Then, slowly, Carl lowered his weapon. "This isn't over," he said, glaring at Nina. "Someday, somewhere, we'll meet again." "I hope not," Nina said quietly. "But if we do, bring more men. 2 were not enough." Carl's face went red, but he holstered his pistol and walked to his horse. He mounted up, gave them both one last hard look, and rode out of the canyon, dust rising behind him. Nina's legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the ground, the rifle falling from her hands. Marshal Cooper dismounted and walked over, kneeling beside her. He examined her shoulder wound with practiced eyes. "That needs a doctor," he said. "Silver Creek has one. I'll take you there." "My grandmother," Nina said. "I need to get back to her. She is waiting for me." "Where is she?" 2 days north, in the hills beyond Redstone Mesa. Marshal Cooper nodded slowly. We'll get you patched up first, then I will ride with you to find her. Deal? Nina looked at this man, this lawman who had saved her life, and saw something in his eyes she had not expected to see. Kindness. Real kindness, not the fake kind that came before betrayal. Why did you help me? She asked. Cooper was quiet for a moment, looking out at the darkening desert. 20 years ago, an Apache woman found me dying of snakebite out in the painted desert. She could have left me there, could have taken my horse and supplies and let me die. Instead, she saved my life, nursed me back to health, and sent me on my way. I never got to thank her properly. Maybe this is how I do that. He helped Nina to her feet, supporting her weight as they walked toward his horse. The stars were coming out now, bright and clear in the deep blue sky. Nina looked up at them, at the familiar patterns her father had taught her, and felt something loosen in her chest. She had survived. Against all odds, against 3 armed men and her own injuries, she had survived. What is your name? Cooper asked as he helped her onto his horse. Nina Blackfeather. Well, Nina Blackfeather, you are one tough woman. Toughest I have seen in a long time. Nina managed a small smile despite the pain. I am Apache. We do not give up easily. No, Cooper said, swinging up into the saddle behind her. I don't suppose you do. They rode through the night towards Silver Creek, the stars lighting their way. Nina drifted in and out of consciousness, the pain and blood loss taking their toll. But each time she woke, she felt Marshal Cooper's steady presence behind her, keeping her from falling, keeping her safe. The town appeared as the sun rose. A collection of wooden buildings sprawled along the creek that gave the place its name. Cooper took her straight to the doctor's office, pounding on the door until a sleepy man in his nightshirt answered. Marshal, what in the world? The doctor started, then saw Nina and went pale. Is she... She is alive, and she is staying that way, Cooper said firmly. Bullet wound to the shoulder, some blood loss. She needs care now. The doctor, despite his initial reaction, proved to be professional. He worked quickly, cleaning the wound, removing fabric that had been driven into it by the bullet, and stitching it closed. Nina gritted her teeth through the pain, refusing to cry out. Cooper stood by the window, watching the street, making sure no one came looking for trouble. When the doctor finished, he wrapped Nina's shoulder in clean bandages and gave her some bitter medicine for the pain. She needs rest, he said to Cooper. At least a week before she should be riding anywhere. She does not have a week, Cooper replied. Her grandmother is alone in the hills, waiting for her. We leave tomorrow. The doctor looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Cooper's expression stopped him. Instead, he gave Nina more medicine and instructions for changing the bandages, then left them alone. Cooper found Nina a room at the boarding house, paying for it himself. He brought her food, which she ate slowly, her appetite gone but knowing she needed strength. Then he sat in the chair by the window and cleaned his rifle while she rested. You do not have to do this, Nina said after a while. I can find my way back alone. Probably, Cooper agreed, but you should not have to. Besides, I want to meet this grandmother of yours. Any woman who raised someone as stubborn as you must be something special. Nina almost smiled. She is. She taught me everything. How to track, how to hunt, how to survive. She says I have the spirit of a warrior, like my father had.
Your father was a warrior?
He was. The soldiers took him 12 years ago, said he had raided a settlement. He had not. He was hunting, same as I was when Dixon found me. But they did not care about truth. They just wanted Apache blood. Cooper was quiet for a long time. I am sorry, he said finally, for what my people have done to yours. Your people? Nina looked at him. You saved my life. You are not like them. Maybe not all of us are, Cooper said, but enough of us are that it hardly matters. They left at dawn the next morning. Nina was weak but determined, and Cooper had procured a gentle horse for her to ride. They traveled slowly, stopping often to let Nina rest. Her shoulder ached constantly, but the medicine the doctor had given her helped dull the worst of it. As they rode, Cooper told her stories about his years as a marshal, about the good people he had met, and the bad ones he had put in jail. Nina found herself listening carefully, learning about this world that had always been separate from hers. In return, she told him about her people, about the old ways that were dying, about the young ones who were trying to find a path between two worlds. On the second day, they crossed into the hills beyond Redstone Mesa. Nina felt her heart lift as the landscape became familiar. She knew every rock here, every tree, every hidden spring. This was her land, the place where she belonged. They found her grandmother's camp as the sun was setting. The old woman sat by a small fire, her weathered face turned toward the sound of approaching horses. When she saw Nina, relief flooded her features, followed quickly by concern. "Nina," she said in Apache, standing slowly with the help of a walking stick, "you are hurt." "I am alive, grandmother," Nina replied in the same language. "That is what matters." The old woman's eyes moved to Marshal Cooper, studying him with the intensity of someone who had survived 80 winters. She spoke in English, surprising Nina. "You brought my granddaughter home, lawman. Why?" Cooper dismounted and removed his hat respectfully. "Because it was the right thing to do, ma'am, and because someone of your people did the same for me once." The grandmother nodded slowly. "You may eat with us tonight. Tomorrow you will go. But tonight you are welcome at our fire." They ate rabbit stew that the grandmother had prepared, and Nina told her the whole story of what had happened. The old woman listened without interrupting, her face unreadable. When Nina finished, the grandmother looked at Cooper. "You have done a great thing," she said. "My granddaughter is precious to me. She is the last of our family line, the last one who remembers the old ways and honors them. Without her, I would have died alone, and our stories would have died with me." "She is strong," Cooper said. "She killed 2 men and held off a third until I arrived. Many warriors would have fallen in her place." The grandmother smiled, and for a moment Nina could see the young woman she must have been long ago. "She has her father's courage and her mother's wisdom. I have taught her everything I know. She will survive whatever comes, because that is what our people do. We survive." That night Nina lay in her bedroll under the stars, listening to Cooper and her grandmother talk by the fire. They spoke of many things, these 2 people from different worlds, finding common ground in their respect for the land and their understanding of what it meant to endure. In the morning, Cooper prepared to leave. Nina walked with him to his horse, her shoulder still painful but healing. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." "No need for thanks," Cooper replied. "Just promise me something. Stay alive, Nina Blackfeather. The world needs people like you. People who fight even when the odds are impossible." "I promise," Nina said, "and if you ever need help, if you ever find yourself alone against enemies, send word. I will come." Cooper smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "I believe you would. Take care of your grandmother. She is a treasure." He mounted up and rode away, raising one hand in farewell. Nina watched until he disappeared into the morning haze, then turned back to her grandmother's camp. There was work to do, always work to do. Wood to gather, food to hunt, stories to remember and pass on. But as she walked back, Nina felt something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, there were enough good people in the world to balance out the bad ones. Hope that her people's stories would not die, that someone would remember who they had been and what they had endured. She found her grandmother sitting by the fire, grinding corn for bread. The old woman looked up and smiled. "You did well, Nina. Your father would be proud." Nina knelt beside her and took her grandmother's wrinkled hand. "Teach me more, grandmother. Teach me everything so that when you are gone, I can teach others. The stories cannot die." "They will not die," the grandmother said firmly. "Not as long as there are people like you to remember them. Now come. Help me make this bread, and I will tell you about the time your great-grandfather fought a bear with only a knife and his courage." As Nina worked alongside her grandmother, listening to stories of warriors and heroes long dead, she thought about the desert canyon where she had almost died. She thought about Carl Dixon and his hatred, about Marshal Cooper and his kindness, about the thin line between life and death that she had walked. But mostly, she thought about survival, about the way her people had endured for generations, adapting and changing, but never giving up, never surrendering who they were at their core. She was part of that legacy now, a link in a chain stretching back through time. And she would not let that chain break. No matter what came, no matter who tried to stop her, she would survive. She would remember. She would endure. Because that was what it meant to be Apache. That was what it meant to be Nina Blackfeather. The days turned into weeks, and Nina's shoulder healed slowly but surely. She spent her time hunting, bringing back deer and rabbit for her grandmother, gathering herbs and roots, preparing for the winter that would come. Her grandmother taught her more stories, more of the old ways, passing down knowledge that had been carried for generations. One afternoon, as Nina was cleaning a deer she had killed, she heard horses approaching. Her hand went instinctively to her knife, memories of the ambush still fresh. But when the riders came into view, she relaxed. It was Marshal Cooper, and he was not alone. With him rode a young woman, maybe 19 or 20, with long dark hair and eyes that reminded Nina of a frightened doe. The girl wore a dress that had once been fine but was now torn and dirty. Her face was bruised, and she clutched the saddle horn like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "Nina," Cooper called as they approached. "I need your help." Nina wiped her hands and walked over. "What happened?" "This is Lucy Martinez. I found her 2 days ago, walking alone on the desert road. She was taken by raiders, escaped 3 nights ago. She has nowhere to go, no family left. The raiders killed them all." Nina looked at the girl, saw the trauma in her eyes, the way she flinched at sudden movements. She had seen that look before, in the eyes of Apache women who had been taken by soldiers, in children who had watched their parents die. "Why bring her here?" Nina asked quietly. "Because she needs someone who understands," Cooper said. "Someone who knows what it means to survive when everything has been taken from you. Someone who can teach her to be strong again." Nina met his eyes, understanding what he was asking. It was one thing to survive yourself, another thing entirely to help someone else do the same. It was responsibility, commitment, risk. If the girl stayed with them, she would need food, protection, teaching, and there was always the chance that whoever had taken her would come looking. But when Nina looked at Lucy, she saw herself a month ago, bleeding in the desert, whispering, "Don't let me die out here, please," to the uncaring sky. She saw every Apache woman who had been hurt and broken but refused to give up. She saw her grandmother, who had survived 80 winters of loss and pain and never stopped teaching, never stopped hoping. "Grandmother," Nina called, and the old woman emerged from her shelter, leaning on her walking stick. She looked at Lucy for a long moment, then at Nina, then at Cooper. "You bring us a daughter," the grandmother said finally. "Good. We have room for one more." Relief washed over Cooper's face. He helped Lucy down from the horse, and Nina caught her when her legs nearly gave out. The girl weighed almost nothing, her body weak from hunger and fear. "Thank you," Lucy whispered. "Thank you so much." "Do not thank us yet," Nina's grandmother said, but her voice was gentle. "Life here is hard. You will work, you will learn, you will hurt before you heal. But if you are willing, we will teach you to survive. We will teach you to be strong." Lucy nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I will do anything. I just don't want to feel helpless anymore." "Then you have come to the right place," Nina said, helping her toward the shelter. "We do not do helpless here." Cooper stayed for dinner again, and before he left, he pulled Nina aside. "I have been thinking," he said, "about what you said, about sending word if I need help. I might take you up on that someday." "I meant it," Nina replied. "I know you did." "That is why I am going to tell you something. Carl Dixon is gathering men, angry men, who blame Apache people for every problem in the territory. He is planning something, though I do not know what yet. Be careful, Nina. Be ready." Nina felt ice in her stomach. How many men? Maybe 20. Maybe more. They meet in secret, but I have sources. They talk about cleaning out the hills, about finishing what the army started. When? I do not know. Weeks, maybe a month. Cooper gripped her shoulder, the good one. "If it comes to fighting, if you need to run, you send word to me in Silver Creek. I will come with whoever I can gather. I will not let Dixon murder you and your grandmother." "We do not run," Nina said. "We survive." "Sometimes surviving means running," Cooper said gently. "There is no shame in it." After he left, Nina told her grandmother what he had said. The old woman listened, her face grave, then nodded slowly. "We have been through this before," she said. "Your grandfather and I. The soldiers came, burned our village, took the young men away. We survived because we were smart, because we knew when to fight and when to hide. We will do the same now." "But Lucy," Nina said. "She is not ready for this. She can barely walk." "Then we make her ready," the grandmother said firmly. "We have time. Not much, but enough. She will learn or she will die. Those are the only choices any of us have." The next morning, Nina began training Lucy. It started with simple things, walking without pain, carrying water, gathering firewood. Lucy struggled, her body weak from her ordeal, but she never complained. Nina saw determination in the girl's eyes, a fierce will to survive that reminded her of herself. As weeks passed, Lucy grew stronger. She learned to track animals, to read signs in the dirt, to move quietly through the brush. Nina taught her to shoot, using an old rifle that had belonged to Nina's father. At first, Lucy could barely hold it steady, but gradually her aim improved. The grandmother taught Lucy about plants, which ones could heal and which ones could kill, which ones could be eaten and which ones would make you sick. She taught her the stories too, the old tales of warriors and heroes, of survival against impossible odds. "Why are you teaching me Apache stories?" Lucy asked one evening. "I am Mexican, not Apache." "You are a survivor," the grandmother replied. "That makes you one of us, no matter what blood runs in your veins. These stories are for anyone who needs them, anyone who refuses to give up." One night, 2 months after Lucy had arrived, Nina woke to find her sitting by the fire, unable to sleep. Nina joined her, and for a while they sat in comfortable silence. "I had a sister," Lucy said finally. "Isabella. She was 12. The raiders killed her first because she screamed. I watched it happen, and I could not do anything to stop it." Nina did not speak, just listened. "I thought I would never feel anything again except pain and anger," Lucy continued. "But you and your grandmother, you have given me something else. Purpose, maybe." Or hope. I do not know the right word. "But I am grateful." "You do not need to be grateful," Nina said. "You earned your place here by working, by learning, by not giving up. That is payment enough." "What happens if those men come?" Lucy asked. "The ones the marshal warned you about. We fight," Nina said simply. "Or we hide. Or both. Whatever we must do to survive." "I want to fight," Lucy said, and there was steel in her voice. "I want them to know that they cannot just take and never face consequences. I want them to know that we are not helpless." Nina looked at this girl who had been broken and was putting herself back together, piece by piece, day by day. "Then we will fight," she said. "Together." The attack came on a cold morning in late autumn. Nina was checking her snares when she heard horses, many horses, moving through the valley below their camp. She ran back, her heart pounding, and found her grandmother and Lucy already gathering supplies. "How many?" the grandmother asked. 20, maybe more," Nina said, grabbing her rifle and ammunition. "They are moving slowly, searching. We have maybe an hour before they reach us." "We go to the caves," the grandmother decided, "the ones your grandfather showed me 50 years ago." "They will not find us there." They moved quickly, taking only what they could carry. Food, water, weapons, blankets, everything else they left behind, knowing it would likely be destroyed. Nina led them up into the rocks, following a path that was barely visible unless you knew where to look. The caves were hidden behind a waterfall that was now just a trickle in the autumn dryness. They squeezed through a narrow opening and found themselves in a space big enough for all three of them. It was cold and damp, but it was hidden, and that was all that mattered. They waited in darkness, listening. After what seemed like hours, they heard voices, heard men moving through their camp below, heard the sound of things being broken, belongings destroyed. Nina felt rage building in her chest, but forced it down. Emotion was dangerous now. Only cold calculation would keep them alive. "Nobody here," a voice called, and Nina recognized it as Carl Dixon's. "But they were here recently." "Fire is still warm." "Probably ran when they saw us coming," another man said. "Cowards, all of them. They are around here somewhere," Dixon said. "Spread out. Check every cave, every hiding spot. I want that girl found. She embarrassed me, killed my brother. She is going to pay for that." Nina felt Lucy's hand grip hers in the darkness. The girl was terrified but silent, and Nina squeezed back, offering what comfort she could. The searchers came closer. Nina could hear boots scraping on rock, voices echoing off stone walls. They were checking caves systematically, thorough and patient. It was only a matter of time before they found the waterfall, found the entrance. Nina made a decision. She handed her rifle to Lucy and whispered in the girl's ear, "If they find us, you shoot anyone who comes through that opening. Do not hesitate. Promise me." Lucy nodded, her hands shaking as she took the weapon.
Nina turned to her grandmother. "I am going to lead them away."
"When they follow me, you and Lucy go north. There is a ranch 3 days from here run by a man named Henderson. Tell him I sent you. He will help."
"No!"
the grandmother said firmly. "We stay together. If we stay together, we all die," Nina said. "But if I run, they will chase me. They want me, not you. This is the only way." Before her grandmother could argue further, Nina squeezed through the cave opening and emerged into the daylight. She saw 3 men maybe 50 yards away, their backs to her. She picked up a rock and threw it, hard, hitting one of them in the shoulder. They spun around, and Nina gave them a fierce smile. "Looking for me, cowards?" Then she ran. Behind her, she heard shouts, heard men scrambling to follow. She ran down the rocky slope, her feet finding purchase on stones she had climbed 1,000 times. Behind her, the men slipped and cursed, struggling to keep up. Nina was fast, but more importantly, she knew this land. Every rock, every tree, every hidden path was familiar to her. She led them on a chase through the hills, always staying just far enough ahead that they would not give up. She crossed streams, climbed cliffs, doubled back on her own trail. Some of the men fell behind, exhausted, but Dixon and 4 others stayed with her, determined and angry. As the sun began to set, Nina's legs were burning, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The wound in her shoulder, though healed, ached from the exertion. She needed to find a place to make a stand, somewhere she could fight on her own terms. She remembered a place, a narrow canyon that her father had shown her years ago. It had only one entrance, which made it a trap, but it also meant she would only have to defend one direction. She ran for it, hoping her memory was accurate, hoping it was still the way she remembered. The canyon was there, unchanged by time. Nina scrambled inside, found a good position behind some rocks, and checked the pistol she had taken from Pete Dixon months ago. It was fully loaded now, 6 bullets. She also had her knife. Against 5 men, it was not much, but it would have to be enough. Dixon and his men arrived as darkness fell. They spread out at the canyon entrance, rifles ready. "You cannot run anymore," Dixon called. "There is nowhere left to go. Come out and I will make it quick."
"You lie," Nina called back.
"You want to make me suffer, like you made your brother's death my fault? But I only defended myself. I did not want to kill anyone." "You are Apache," Dixon spat. "Your people killed settlers, burned ranches, murdered children. You deserve everything that is coming to you." "My people fought for our land, for our homes," Nina replied. "We defended ourselves just like you would if someone tried to take everything from you." "But you do not see that. You only see what you want to see." "Enough talking," one of the other men said. "Let's just rush her. She is only one girl." "One girl who killed 3 men already," Dixon reminded him. "Anyone who goes in there first is probably going to die. So which one of you volunteers?" There was silence. Nina smiled grimly in the darkness. They were afraid, and fear made people make mistakes. She waited, conserving her strength, listening to them argue. As the hours passed, their voices grew more frustrated. They were cold, tired, and starting to question whether one Apache girl was worth all this trouble. Then Nina heard something that made her heart race. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses coming fast. Had Dixon called for reinforcements? But when the riders came into view, illuminated by the rising moon, Nina saw Marshal Cooper at the front, with 6 other men behind him. All of them wore badges. All of them had their weapons drawn. "Carl Dixon," Cooper's voice rang out across the canyon. "You and your men are under arrest for attempted murder, vigilante violence, and destruction of property." Dixon spun to face him. "You have no jurisdiction here, Cooper. This is personal business. Everything is my jurisdiction when it involves the law," Cooper replied. "Now drop your weapons, all of you, or we will drop you." For a long moment, nobody moved. Nina held her breath, waiting to see what Dixon would decide. Then, slowly, he set down his rifle. The other men followed his lead, none of them willing to die for this cause. Cooper's deputies moved in, collecting weapons and binding the men's hands. Cooper himself walked to the canyon entrance and called out, "Nina, you can come out now. It is over." Nina emerged slowly, her pistol still in her hand, not quite ready to believe it was really finished. But when she saw Dixon and his men disarmed and defeated, she felt something break loose inside her chest. Relief, exhaustion, gratitude, all mixed together. "How did you know?" she asked Cooper. "I have been watching Dixon for weeks," he said. "When he gathered his men and headed into the hills, I knew where he was going. I just wish I had gotten here sooner."
"You got here soon enough,"
Nina said. "My grandmother and Lucy, they are safe?" "Lucy?" Cooper looked confused. Nina quickly explained about the girl they had taken in. Cooper nodded thoughtfully. "If they went north like you told them, they should reach Henderson's place tomorrow. I will send word to him to expect them, keep them safe until you arrive." Over the next hour, Cooper and his deputies secured Dixon and his men, preparing them for the long ride back to Silver Creek to face trial. Nina watched, still not quite believing that it was over, that she had survived again. Before they left, Cooper pulled Nina aside. "You know you could come back with us. There is a place for you in Silver Creek if you want it." You could live there, be safe. Nina shook her head. That is not my place. My place is with my grandmother, with Lucy, in the hills where my people have always been. But thank you for the offer. I figured you would say that, Cooper said with a small smile, but I had to ask. You take care of yourself, Nina Blackfeather. Try not to get shot at for a while, all right? I will do my best, Nina promised. She watched them ride away, taking Dixon and his hatred with them. Then she started walking north, toward Henderson's ranch, toward her grandmother and Lucy. Her body ached, her feet were bleeding, and she was so tired she could barely stand. But she kept walking, because that was what survivors did. They kept going, no matter what. It took her 2 days to reach the ranch. She walked through the night, rested during the day, pushed herself beyond what she thought possible. When she finally saw the ranch buildings in the distance, she nearly wept with relief. Henderson turned out to be a grizzled old rancher with kind eyes and a firm handshake. He had already received word from Cooper and had taken Nina's grandmother and Lucy in without question. When Nina stumbled into his barn, she found him there, safe and whole. Her grandmother embraced her, and for the first time in months, Nina let herself cry. She cried for her father who had been taken, for the life she had lost, for the constant fear and fighting. She cried until there were no tears left, and then she slept for 16 hours straight. When she woke, her grandmother and Lucy were sitting beside her, watching over her. Henderson had given them a place to stay in his barn, had offered them work and protection. It was not home, but it was safe, and safety was a luxury Nina had almost forgotten. What happens now? Lucy asked. Do we stay here? Nina looked at her grandmother, who smiled. We have been talking, Lucy and I. Henderson has offered us a permanent place here if we want it. We would work for him, help with his horses, his cattle. In return, we would have shelter, food, protection. And Henderson is a good man, Lucy added. He has not looked at me the way other men do. He treats me like a person, not like something broken. Nina thought about it. Staying here would mean giving up the hills, the land where her people had lived for generations. But it would also mean safety, stability, a chance to heal. And maybe, just maybe, a chance to build something new. What do you think, grandmother? Nina asked. The old woman was quiet for a long time. I think the old ways are dying, she said finally. I think we must adapt or disappear, but adapting does not mean forgetting. We can live here, work here, be part of this new world, but we will remember who we are, where we came from. We will teach Lucy our stories, and someday she will teach them to others. The stories will survive even if the old life does not.
Nina nodded slowly.
Then we stay? At least for now. Henderson proved to be as good as his word. He put them to work with his horses, and Nina discovered she had a gift for it. The animals trusted her, responded to her gentle touch and patient training. Lucy worked in the garden, growing vegetables and herbs, her hands finding peace in the soil. The grandmother taught both of them, told them stories every night by the fire, passing down knowledge that had been carried for generations. Months passed. Winter came and went, and spring brought new life to the ranch. Nina's shoulder healed completely, leaving only a scar that she wore like a badge of honor. She had survived, and the scar was proof of that. One day in early summer, Marshal Cooper visited. He brought news that Carl Dixon and his men had been tried and sentenced. Dixon himself would spend the next 20 years in prison. The others had received shorter sentences, but all of them were off the streets. I thought you would want to know, Cooper said as they sat on Henderson's porch, watching the sunset. Thank you, Nina said, for everything. You saved my life more than once, and you saved Lucy's life by taking her in, Cooper replied. I would say we are even. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Cooper spoke again. I had been thinking about what you said, about your father being taken by soldiers who did not care about the truth, about how your people have been treated. I cannot change the past, but I can try to do better in the future. I have been working with the territorial governor, trying to establish laws that protect everyone, not just white settlers. Nina looked at him in surprise. Why? Because it is the right thing to do, Cooper said simply. Because I have seen too much injustice, too much suffering that did not need to happen.
And because I knew your father, Nina, before he was taken, I knew it.
He was a good man, a peaceful man. What happened to him was wrong, and I did not speak up when I should have. I am trying to make up for that now. Nina felt tears prick her eyes. You knew my father? I did. He saved my life once, pulled me out of a flash flood when I was stupid enough to try crossing a swollen river. I owed him everything, and I did nothing when they took him away. That is something I will regret for the rest of my life. They talked long into the night about her father, about the past, about the future. When Cooper left the next morning, Nina felt something she had not felt before. Not just hope, but genuine belief that things could get better, that the world could change. As summer turned to autumn, life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. Henderson proved to be not just an employer but a friend, someone who valued Nina and her family for who they were. He learned some Apache words, asked about their customs, treated their traditions with respect.
Lucy blossomed in this environment.
The frightened, broken girl who had arrived months ago was gone, replaced by a strong young woman who could rope a steer and shoot a rifle with the best of them. She still had nightmares sometimes, still flinched at sudden movements, but she was healing. And every night she listened to the grandmother's stories, memorizing them, making them part of herself. One evening, as they sat around the fire, Lucy asked the grandmother a question. "Will you teach me the Apache language? I want to know the stories in their original words."
The grandmother's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears. "Yes," she said.
"I will teach you, and you will teach others someday. The language will not die." Nina watched this exchange and felt a profound sense of peace. This was not the life she had imagined, not the future she had planned, but it was good. It was enough, and most importantly, it was hers, earned through survival and struggle and refusing to give up. Winter came again, harsh and cold. Henderson fell ill with pneumonia, and for a while they feared they would lose him. But Nina remembered her grandmother's teachings about healing herbs, about medicine that came from the land. She gathered plants, made remedies, nursed Henderson back to health. He recovered slowly, and when he was well enough to speak, he called all 3 women to his bedside. "I have no family," he said, his voice still weak. "No children, no wife. When I die, this ranch will go to the bank unless I do something about it. I want to change my will. I want to leave this place to the 3 of you." Nina started to protest, but Henderson held up his hand. "You saved my life, Nina. You and your grandmother and Lucy, you have made this place a home again. It has not been a home since my wife died 15 years ago. But you changed that. You belong here, and I want you to have it." The grandmother spoke softly. "You honor us, Henderson. We accept with gratitude." When spring came, Henderson was strong enough to ride again, and he took them into Silver Creek to make the will official. The town had changed since Nina's last visit. There were new buildings, new people, and the way people looked at Nina had changed too. Word had spread about what had happened with Dixon, about how she had survived against impossible odds. Some looked at her with respect, others with curiosity, but none with the naked hatred she had seen before. They stopped at the marshal's office, and Cooper greeted them warmly. He had news. The territorial laws he had been working on had passed. Apache people would now have the same legal protections as anyone else. It was not everything, not nearly enough, but it was a start. "Things are changing," Cooper said. "Slowly, but they are changing. And people like you, Nina, people who refuse to be victims, who insist on their dignity and their rights, you are the ones making it happen." That night, as they camped on the way back to the ranch, Nina looked up at the stars. She thought about her father, wondered if he could see her from wherever he was. She hoped he was proud. She hoped he knew that she had survived, that she had honored his memory by refusing to give up. "What are you thinking about?" Lucy asked, sitting down beside her. "My father," Nina said, "and how strange life is. A year ago, I was just trying to survive one more day. Now I have a home, a family, a future. It does not seem real." "It is real," Lucy said firmly. "You earned it. We all earned it." The grandmother joined them, moving slowly but steadily. At 81 winters, she was still strong, still sharp. "Tell me," she said to Lucy, "what have you learned this year?" Lucy thought for a moment. "I learned that surviving is not enough. You have to fight for the right to exist, to be treated with dignity. I learned that family is not just blood, it is the people who stand with you when everything else falls apart. And I learned that stories matter, that remembering where we come from gives us strength to face where we are going." The grandmother smiled, deeply pleased. "Good. You have learned well. Now, teach me something. What do you want to pass on to the next generation?" "I want to teach them that women are not helpless," Lucy said. "That we can be strong, can fight, can survive anything if we refuse to give up. I want them to know that being broken does not mean being destroyed, that we can heal and become even stronger than before."
Yes, the grandmother said. That is a good lesson.
Nina, what about you? What do you want to pass on? Nina considered the question carefully. I want to teach them about balance, about honoring the old ways while adapting to the new world. About fighting when you must, but making peace when you can. About the difference between surviving and truly living. Also good, the grandmother said. These are the lessons that matter. Not how to kill, not how to hate, but how to live with strength and dignity. This is what we will teach. They stayed up late that night talking and telling stories. The grandmother shared tales Nina had never heard before, stories about her own grandmother, about warriors and medicine women and leaders who had shaped their people. Lucy listened intently, memorizing every word, already thinking about how she would retell these stories someday. Years passed. Henderson eventually did pass away, peacefully in his sleep, and the ranch became theirs as he had promised. Nina continued working with the horses, building a reputation across the territory. People came from far away to buy horses she had trained, to learn her methods. She never turned away anyone who was willing to learn, regardless of their background. Lucy married a kind man from Silver Creek, a carpenter named Daniel, who treated her with respect and love. They had children, 3 daughters who grew up hearing the grandmother's stories, learning both Apache and Spanish and English, belonging to multiple worlds simultaneously. Lucy taught her daughters to be strong, to fight when necessary, to never accept being treated as less than human. The grandmother lived to see those great-grandchildren, though they were not related by blood. She lived to be 93 winters old, her mind sharp until the very end. On the night she died, she gathered everyone around her fire one last time. I am ready, she said simply. I have lived a long life, seen many things. I have lost much, but I have also gained much. I raised Nina to be strong, and she raised Lucy, and Lucy is raising her daughters. The chain continues. The stories survive. That is all that matters. She looked at each of them in turn. Nina, you are a warrior, but you are also a builder. You have created something that will last beyond you. Be proud of that. Lucy, you are a survivor who became a teacher. Your strength inspires others. Never forget that. And you girls, she said to Lucy's daughters, you are the future. You carry our stories, our strength, our refusal to give up. Remember where you come from, but do not let it limit where you are going. She died that night, peacefully, surrounded by the family she had helped create. They buried her on a hillside overlooking the ranch, with a view of the desert where she had been born. Nina carved a marker from wood, decorated it with traditional Apache symbols, and planted wildflowers around the grave. She taught me everything, Nina said at the funeral, her voice breaking. How to survive, how to fight, how to endure. But most importantly, she taught me that surviving is not enough. We must also live, must also find joy and purpose and meaning. She did that until her very last breath. Marshal Cooper attended the funeral, old now but still sharp. He had served as marshal for 30 years, had seen the territory transform from a violent, lawless place to something approaching civilization. Much of that transformation was due to his efforts, his insistence on justice for everyone. She was remarkable, Cooper said to Nina after the service. In all my years, I never met anyone quite like her. She had seen so much pain, so much loss, but she never became bitter. She just kept teaching, kept fighting in her own way. She would say she was just doing what needed to be done, Nina replied. That survival is the greatest act of resistance. Maybe so, Cooper said. But not everyone has that kind of strength. As more years passed, Nina became a legend in the territory. People told stories about the Apache woman who had survived an ambush, who had fought off 20 men, who had built a life from nothing. Stories grew in the telling, became exaggerated, but Nina did not mind. If her story gave others hope, gave them strength to face their own struggles, then the exaggerations served a purpose. She never married, never had children of her own, but she had Lucy's daughters, who called her Aunt Nina, and learned from her as she had learned from her grandmother. She had the ranch, which became a place of refuge for people who had nowhere else to go. Over the years, she took in runaway women, orphan children, men who had been broken by violence and needed a place to heal. She taught them all the same lessons she had learned, that survival requires strength, that strength comes from refusing to give up, that we are all capable of more than we think. One summer day, when Nina was in her 50s, a young Apache woman arrived at the ranch. She was maybe 20, thin and frightened, with a baby in her arms. She had escaped from a reservation where conditions were terrible, where people were dying of hunger and disease. She had heard about Nina, about the ranch where Apache people could find safety. Nina took her in without hesitation. The young woman, whose name was Maria, worked hard and learned quickly. Her baby, a boy named James, grew strong and healthy under the care of the ranch, and Maria, like Lucy before her, began to heal. "Why do you do this?" Maria asked one evening as they worked together in the garden. "You could have an easier life, could leave all of this behind. But instead you take in people like me, people with nothing to offer." "Because someone did it for me," Nina said simply. "Because Marshall Cooper saved my life when he could have let me die. Because my grandmother taught me that we survive together or we do not survive at all. And because every person I help is another victory over people like Carl Dixon, people who wanted to erase us from existence. By surviving, by building, by creating families and communities, we prove them wrong." Maria nodded slowly, understanding. "Thank you," she said, "for giving us a chance." "You do not need to thank me," Nina replied. "Just pass it on. Someday, when you are strong again, when you have built a life, help someone else who needs it. That is all I ask." Nina lived to be 73 years old. She died in her sleep, peacefully, after a long day working with the horses she loved. Lucy's daughters found her in the morning, a slight smile on her face, as if she had died dreaming of something pleasant. The funeral was huge. People came from across the territory, Apache and Mexican and white, all of them touched by Nina's life in some way. Former students, people she had helped, children of people she had saved. Marshall Cooper was there, ancient now but still standing tall. Henderson's old friends came, ranchers who had learned to respect the Apache woman who had turned their world upside down. Lucy spoke at the funeral, her voice strong despite her tears. "Nina taught me that being a victim is something that happens to you, but being a survivor is a choice you make every day. She made that choice over and over, even when it would have been easier to give up. She built this place, this community, from nothing but determination and a refusal to accept defeat. We honor her by continuing that work, by helping the next person who stumbles to our door, desperate and afraid." They buried Nina next to her grandmother on the hillside overlooking the ranch. Lucy's daughters planted more wildflowers, and Maria's son James, now a strong young man, carved a new wooden marker. It read simply, "Nina Blackfeather, warrior, teacher, friend." She survived. Years after Nina's death, Lucy sat on the porch of the ranch, now elderly herself, watching her great-grandchildren play in the yard. They were a mix of Apache and Mexican and white, belonging to all worlds and none, creating something new. And every night Lucy told them stories. Stories about Nina and the grandmother, about survival and strength, about refusing to give up no matter how impossible things seemed. "Tell us about the time Aunt Nina fought off 20 men, one of the children asked, as they always did. Lucy smiled. "It was not exactly 20 men, she said, as she always did. It was more like 3, then later maybe 5 more. But the number does not matter. What matters is that she survived when she could have died. She fought when she could have surrendered. She built something beautiful when she could have let bitterness destroy her. Will you teach us to be like her?" the child asked. "I will teach you what she taught me," Lucy replied. "That strength is not about how hard you can hit, but about how many times you can be knocked down and still get back up. That family is about choosing to stand together, not about blood. That we honor our ancestors by living well, by creating beauty in a harsh world, by refusing to let hatred win." The sun was setting over the desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and red and purple. Lucy looked out at that vast landscape, at the land that had challenged and shaped and nearly killed Nina, but had ultimately become her home. She thought about how far they had all come, how much had changed. "Grandmother," one of the children said, using the Apache word Nina had taught them all. "Do you think Aunt Nina's watching us?" Lucy smiled. "I think she is. And I think she is proud. We survived, just like she taught us. And we are teaching you to survive too." The chain continues. The stories live on. That is what matters. As darkness fell, Lucy gathered the children inside. They sat around the fire, and she began to tell them another story. This one about a brave Apache woman who had whispered, "Don't let me die out here, please," to the desert wind, and then had refused to let that plea be her last words, who had fought and survived and built and taught, who had transformed pain into purpose and fear into strength. The children listened with wide eyes, memorizing every word, already planning how they would retell this story someday to their own children. And in that moment, Lucy knew that Nina's greatest victory was not surviving the ambush, or fighting off Dixon's men, or building the ranch. It was this, that her story would outlive her, that generations yet unborn would hear about her courage and draw strength from it. The fire crackled, the children listened, and outside the desert wind whispered through the hills where Nina had once run for her life.
But the wind no longer carried fear.
It carried stories, memories, lessons learned at great cost and passed on with care. It carried the voice of a woman who had refused to die when death seemed certain, who had refused to give up when giving up would have been easier. It carried the sound of survival, of resistance, of hope, and it would continue to carry those sounds for as long as anyone remembered to listen, for as long as anyone bothered to tell the stories, for as long as people needed to believe that they too could survive anything if they simply refused to quit. The chain continued. The stories survived. And somewhere, perhaps, Nina Blackfeather smiled, knowing that she had achieved what she set out to do all those years ago when she whispered her desperate plea to an uncaring desert. She had survived. And in surviving, she had ensured that others would survive too. That was enough. That was everything. That was the legacy of a brave Apache woman who had faced death and defeated it, not just once, but every single day of her remarkable life.